Welcome back to Heal, Healing, Empowering, Accepting, and Living, a podcast sponsored by Change by Fire. We're grateful to have you a part of this season and this new episode around grief and loss. And thank you for facing the hard realities of recovery and life with us. My name is Lori, and I'm a 15-year burn advocate, clinical social worker, and current holistic trauma therapist.
And I'm Jen Severance, and I am a burn survivor since 2017. So welcome. So yeah, we just finished the first episode of season 9 on defining grief and loss and healing. We reviewed the definitions of grief and loss, how these experiences are found in burn and trauma injuries and healing. And we explored our personal experiences surrounding that molded our own lives and recoveries. And thanks to our producer, Dave, for joining us on that one. We always love having him in here. It's fun. Mm-hmm. So we ended with a brief somatic grief release to explore how grief and loss are stored in our body and how we can practice connecting with, holding, and moving through that. How was that for you? We would love to hear that.
I always love hearing people's feedback to any type of tools or insights or just modalities that we speak of in our session and about our speakers as well too. And today we're going to explore a little bit more about the impact of loss in life and particularly how to find a sense of willingness in facing, letting go, transformation, and moving forward in healing and recovery. And we're honored to have a special guest with us in this journey, and we look forward to introducing her shortly. So are you ready to explore, hold, feel, and recover more with us? Let's get healing.
So last episode, our first in this season around grief and loss, we explored the myriad of losses that can occur around a burn injury and the healing experience. Losses of safety, autonomy, time, relationship, mobility, people, just so much that is around this topic. These losses can occur throughout the injury process and beyond, from the initial injury to the hospital stay, to recovery and rehabilitation, and to home and life transitions going forward. And as human beings, we also talked about how variable our approaches to loss are. Oftentimes we don't speak on it, we don't acknowledge it, we can minimize it, and can even have it shamed or expectations put upon us by others in certain ways, depending upon our culture, our religion, our family, and life experiences. Yeah. So I'm sure in your capacity as in your work with people that you deal with, you hear about all those different aspects.
Not only just like different types of loss and loss experiences, but just the okayness to open up, to share, to talk about, and the different beliefs around what is and is not okay, depending on people's lived experiences, their cultures, their families, the ways in which loss happens.
Yeah. And so we can't always control or adjust how others react to and perceive and hold our life experiences. However, we can reframe how we fully take in and support and hold our own.
And this episode, as well as I will say throughout the season, we're going to be talking a lot about our nervous system. Yeah. And our nervous system is just really holds our responses to life experiences. And our nervous system has a pretty strong response to the grief process and thereby how we perceive, how we react to grief. So when we encounter a loss, our brain responds first. The amygdala, that lovely little threat detection center in our brain that activates and interprets that loss as a threat to our very survival. So that's when comes online our nervous system response. So our sympathetic response, that initial response to any sense of danger where we go fight, flight, or freeze. So when that response triggers, our adrenals, our stress hormones then respond and release a surge of cortisol, adrenaline, starting to prepare our body to face that danger or potential danger encounters. And then our body comes online and starts to mobilize for action to face. So that could be increased heart rate, that's your blood pressure rising, that's your breath, you start breathing more rapidly, that sympathetic response. And depending on where our nervous system goes, it typically goes into how we respond in prior danger and life situations. So our prior experience of danger affects how we perceive and interpret the threat, as well as the duration of the threat, the significance of the threat in our system. So some of these nervous system responses can be fight, where we might get irritable and angry and want to push back or defend or attack in some way, or flight, where we get really restless, we try and avoid, we distract, we run away from. Yes, distraction is a flight technique. Mm-hmm. Freeze, where we can numb out, we can detach, we can have that internal lengthy pause. Or fawn is another big one, where we can shift our focus on other people's needs and ignore our own sense of pain. So frequent experience of grief and loss and how heavily it taxes our sympathetic systems can lead to a lot of really chronic physical and emotional symptomology. Lots of fatigue, extensive exhaustion. We can have some pretty big sleep disturbances that affect how we operate, how we engage in life. Lots of anxiety, constant pins and needles feel, hypervigilance in how we live and work in this world. A frequent sense of fogginess, a really disorientation, a lot of illnesses and injuries because our immune system is compromised. So what we feel, what we experience, what's matching, grief can be a really big and heavy blanket that can often overwhelm and overcome us, not only mentally how we work and operate, but how our bodies work and operate, often outside of our own feeling to navigate it, to work with it, to move forward with it, and especially those big moments of grief and loss. Grief really affects and overcomes our ability to perceive, to interact, to engage in life. And I think it's hard. It's in the world that we live in a lot of cultures that we live in, and family environments, societal contexts, it's not spoken of, not talked about. And so we have this like heavy, like overwhelming, like difficult feel. And how do we all deal with, engage, work with that?
Yeah. Well, when it comes to a burn injury, one of the unfortunate factors of healing is that the bigger and more extensive the injury and wounding, the greater the risks. Healing and recovery is not always assured. And what do you do in those critical states and places where you are faced with the inevitable loss of a person and the choices surrounding their functionality and living versus letting go of their physical body and moving forward without them? The biggest facing of loss encompassing all of the stages that we talked about in our last episode. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, it is our honor to witness and bring to this podcast episode an individual who has faced those very losses just mentioned and personally walked this road of tremendous loss amongst injury to find courage and wisdom and value in living forward. So we welcome Jenny Brandemuel to this podcast episode. So welcome, Jenny. Hello.
Well, thank you. It's so great to be here with you both. Thank you for having me.
Of course, we can't wait to hear some of your story.
Absolutely.
Well, and I have the wonderful fortune and yes, I call it a fortune because I really believe human connections that we make in this world and we forge in this world are a huge boon to our life experiences. I have a little bit of a backstory with Jenny, but Jenny, share with our listeners with us kind of what brought you into this experience with burns and trauma. What brought you into this community? This is kind of your story, your introduction.
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. So, back in June of 2019, my husband and I, Mark, were about to retire to Lake Tahoe. We'd both given notice at our jobs, and he decided to fly from Carson City, Nevada, where he was living at the time, nearby, to Scottsdale to the Mayo Clinic to get one of those one-day executive checkups before his retirement. Just wanted to make sure everything was good. And he called me the day before he was about to take off and leave and said, "Clean bill of health, everything looks great." And the next day he got on his flight. He has been a recreational pilot for many years. And so he had a small engine plane flying out of Scottsdale. And about 7 minutes after takeoff, the engine was really giving him problems and he declared emergency and tried to emergency land in Deer Valley, which is a northwest suburb of Phoenix. But it was a 2-lane road with 3 drivers. And while he would have had a near perfect landing if they weren't there, the fact that they were there, he knew he had to, no, not, he had to land somewhere else. And so he swerved to the right to avoid hitting the drivers. And by the way, that first driver told me later that her eyes locked with Mark's and he was coming towards her in the plane and she thought she was going to die. And then he turned a hard right, but because he had lost engine power, his plane was careening out of balance and the right wing clipped 2 light poles. And in small engine planes, the fuel tanks are in the wings. And so the plane caught on fire. The plane hit a concrete barrier, flipped upside down, and he crash landed face down on the side of Deer Valley Road. And what was amazing about that story were there were bystanders. Someone did call 911 right away. And an incredibly courageous Good Samaritan happened to be driving by with his partner. And he said he saw what was happening. The plane was on fire on the ground. He got out of his car and he said to me later that he was so angry to see all these people filming. And he thought, if no one goes out to rescue the pilot, he's going to die. And so Thomas Honeycutt, who's the name of the Good Samaritan, ran out there in shorts and flip flops, 95-degree weather in June, right? 2019. And he said, as I'm running out there, I'm thinking to myself, if the pilot still has his seatbelt on, there is no way I'm going to be able to save him. He's going to be hosed. And he said, as he ran out there, and just when he got to the cockpit window where Mark, my husband, was upside down, he said he saw Mark's seatbelt melt off his body in that moment. And it was really interesting because there was another bystander who was at the site before him. And she said, I saw the plane on fire. I saw Mark. I was so distressed. I didn't know what to do. But I was standing there and I started to pray for Mark. And then all of a sudden, I see this guy run up and pull him out. And so we think, the corroborating story here was that in that moment, after she prayed, his seatbelt melted off him. And then Thomas, who's about 5'8", 5'9", jujitsu champion, very buff, managed to pull Mark out on one try. Mark is 220 pounds and 6'2". And it was just pure adrenaline that he got him out on one try. And then 2 motorcycle mechanics from a nearby motor mechanic school came running over. The 3 of them carried Mark to safety across the road, and then the plane exploded.
Wow.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so, by the way, Thomas Honeycutt, I just have to do a shout out for him. He later went on to receive a Carnegie Hero Award, which they only give to 4 people a quarter in this country. And they are all people who put their own life at risk to rescue somebody else. And he and his partner and little daughter will forever be part of our family because of how much gratitude we have for what he did that day. And to me, that was an act of love. That's love in action, what he did. And otherwise, Mark would have perished that day. Now, Mark suffered 80 third-degree burns over 80% of his body. And so Luckily, he was not far from the Arizona Burn Center, and that's where he ended up. And the crazy thing was, I was at work in Northern California when he called me from ER. He had the presence of mind to have gone through what he did. And that's who he is. I mean, Mark is just, he was an incredible person. I mean, he called me from ER and he said, "I love you, Jenny. Something happened to the plane and I'm in for a long, long recovery." And then he handed me over to the doctor. And the doctor was just talking all this medical stuff. I had no idea what he said. I didn't know what happened to the plane. I said to him, I asked him what happened to his plane. And he said, "I actually don't know. We just received Mark in ER. I couldn't even tell you." And so I asked, "Are his injuries life threatening? That's all I need to know." And the doctor said, "Yes, they are." And I said, "That's all I'm going to need to know. I'll be out there on the first flight I can get." So I rushed home from the office. Our older son, Wesley, was living with us at the time, and he got me booked on the first flight to Phoenix. The press were calling me while I was on the way to the airport. I barely even knew what had happened at that point. And then I made it to Phoenix, and we have some family friends there, so they were all on alert and picked me up at the airport. Anyway, I got there, and by then Mark was already in a medically induced coma because, as you all know, as burn survivors, and Lori's worked with burn survivors and their families, um, it's too painful, right? The condition is so painful, the treatment is so painful. And, he was pretty much in a coma for 4.5 months. And it was hard because I couldn't communicate with him. I couldn't really get his version of what had happened other than what I read in the news and saw on video. And eyewitnesses stepped forward to tell me what happened. And then about 4.5 weeks, he came out of the coma. He was on a tracheotomy, so at least we could say we loved each other. And the funny thing about Mark, you have to understand, Lori knows this because she knew us during that time. Mark is a huge lover of life, right? He was passionate about so many things. He was a double black diamond skier, a hiker. He loved all things fast, but he was very responsible. And he grew up on a dairy farm, so he was operating farm equipment when he was 11. But he loved fast motorcycles, speed boats, fast cars, you name it. Um, the first three sentences he said to me when he came out of his coma was, the first was, "I want to mix and mingle," which means I want to go to a party. The second was, "I want to go on an adventure." And the third sentence was, "I want a martini." And his doctor at the time said, "As soon as we can get him off the respiratory machine, we will get him a martini. You tell me what kind of gin he wants." And I said, "Bombay Sapphire up with a twist." And the doctor said, "Oh, he's a gentleman, is he? We'll get that drink for him." But that just captures the spirit of who Mark was. And I think he was a fighter through all of that. And many times people said he was going to die. The first 2 weeks, I think the head of the burn center, was trying to tell me that he was going to die. And he made it, and he nearly died of a fungal infection. He survived sepsis, blood clots, multiple infections. I mean, fluctuating vitals, right? Because when you lose your largest protective barrier, which is your skin, you're subject to all sorts of, physical dysregulation. And at the end, he caught a routine hospital infection that was resistant to antibiotics, and he died within 24 hours. Now, when they did go in and look at his liver, it looked like it was starting to go. So I think just the cumulative impact on him, the stress on his body, was taking its toll by 5 months. But it was a shock to all of us because we thought he was going to make it. He was 2/3 through his skin graft journey. And, his entire front and arms and face were looking great. And they were working on his back. And so it was a shock. We knew, he had amputations. They had to amputate above the knee on both legs, partial amputations on his fingers. But Mark is so resourceful. We said he would figure out a way to learn adaptive skiing. In fact, he might invent some better way to do it because he was an engineer by background. And that was the kind of hope we had for him, even coming out of this disabled. But in the end, he didn't make it, and it was a huge shock to the family and all our friends. So
Wow.
that's really what happened back in June of 2019.
Wow. That's that's amazing. And I love that you guys kept that hope. And it sounded like he was positive through the whole experience. So now, once you realized the severity of the injuries, can you tell us a little about what helped you stay present and navigate the daily critical nature of his care?
You know, I because Mark was in a coma, I felt like I couldn't let him down, that I had to be on top of it in terms of all the medical things that were going on with him. And although it didn't require daily decisions because it really was a life and death situation, and so the nurses and the doctors knew what they were doing, but there would be times when one of the doctors would say, how much should we do to save him?
Mm.
Right? Because he'll be compromised. And are you comfortable with that for him in making those kinds of decisions? And so those are really tough ones. And so I went into this mode of, it's similar to that, what we always say when you're on a plane with your children, put the oxygen mask on yourself before you start trying to help others, right? And I felt like I had to have a good breakfast every morning, work out every morning. He always had his dressing change in the morning. And so I couldn't really get in to see him till noontime anyway. And so mornings, at least I had to myself. I journaled every day. That was huge for me in terms of having an outlet. And I felt like every day is a new day. I can only deal with the challenges of today. And then I'm going to bed. And then tomorrow, fresh page on my journal, ready for whatever's going to happen. Sleep was tough. I mean, I have to say, as much as I took care of myself, and I really encourage listeners who go through the whole caregiving journey with loved ones, that sleep was tough. I learned to nap a lot, and I had one of those guided meditation apps that really got me through, if I woke up in the middle of the night. So those were all important. The other thing I wanted to mention that was significant was because I was away from home, I had some family friends in Phoenix, but my whole support system was in Northern California. And so I started posting medical updates on one of those online caregiving communities. And I don't know what possessed me to just start pouring my heart out on that to that community, because I was actually a very private, stoic person before Mark had his accident. And so I was always happy to share good news, but not necessarily bad news. And it crossed over into me sharing an awful lot about how much Mark and I loved each other, how we met, what we were going through, what I was going through. And an amazing thing happened. My son, Adrian, who was administering the community, said, "Mom, you do know there are over 500 people on this who've signed up to be in this community." And it's more than friends and family. They were also acquaintances and friends of friends. And after Mark died, I found out that people were forwarding my messages every day to their faith communities, so to their synagogues, to their churches. So we had thousands of people following my messages. And it became a virtuous circle of love and support, because what happened was I learned that the more I was vulnerable and shared what I was feeling and thinking, the more there was just this outpouring of love and support that came back to me. That was a huge learning for me. And then it also caused the communities to start talking among themselves about really deep things. So Mark went to Stanford Business School, and that 350 person classmate group started, normally in their community online, they're talking about, well, who knows an acting CFO who could work at my startup, or who knows a great infrastructure provider in Atlanta where I'm starting a company, right? And instead they started to talk about courage and how inspired they were by what Mark did and what Thomas Honeycutt did that day to save Mark. They started talking about their own health crises. They started talking about such deeper, aspects of their life that they'd never done before. So I think my post really sort of caused them to really reflect more deeply about life. And so that was tremendous. And I think it was a huge lifeline for me. and the nurses as well. I mean, I can't, Lori knows this. The nurses were incredible. They became my second family.
Mhm.
And part of it was because I opened up and shared so much about our family, and then they could plug into it. And they learned about our hopes and dreams, and I learned about their hopes and dreams, and we became friends, truly. So I think all those things really helped me during what was the darkest chapter of my life.
Mhm. And you found something I think that is very real and worthy of mentioning, that the aspect of vulnerability. We long for, we need, we desire places where we can fully be vulnerable. And around grief and loss and really big, deep hurts and hardships, vulnerability can be hard. And you carved out a space of real vulnerability in that online community, and people came to it, and it built and it grew, and you did the same in your interactions with staff and people in the hospital, and that helped build that foundation of relationship and support there. And support, that sense of realness, builds support that can hold and carry us through such big and deep life situations. And I mean, like, your journey as a caregiver, as a partner, amidst such a critical and devastating injury of your spouse. I mean, your ability in that online community, I think in some of the daily interactions with staff there, you were able to share and be real about changes, about the ups, the downs, your emotions, the what was happening. That allowed you that space. And you, like, thinking back on it now, as well as being in it, what did that do for you in the midst
Yeah.
of?
You know, what I learned, Lori, is that when you're vulnerable and you're open about that with other people, it allows them, it gives them permission to share what's on their hearts and minds. I never anticipated that. And there's this great saying by Beppe Sarabino. He's a Italian writer. He said, Italians see people, other cultures look at people. And I never understood that quote until I went through what I did, which is now having been through what I've been through, and it started at the burn center, is I see people. I see who they are. It doesn't matter what their outside packaging is. I met so many other families also in the waiting room with loved ones at the burn center, and we opened up to each other about what was going on with our loved ones, and we were kind to each other. And so there's something about being vulnerable that allows other people to share what's deepest in their hearts, and to also support you, right, in ways that you never would have expected. And that was huge, and that was really what I learned about being vulnerable. And the other thing is, after Mark died, I continued that in my own way, and I found that when you're in grief as well, everybody's on their own timeline with grief,
Mhm.
but it can help to just allowed me, I decided I had to allow myself to feel the full range of emotions without judging myself. And I think that's really, really important. A lot of people feel like they've got to wear that mask all the time, right? And
Yeah.
true at the burn center as well when I was with Mark.
Yeah. It's amazing how much we boundary ourselves
Mm.
by what we can and cannot do, when the reality is when we can truly show up as we really are and as we're really feeling and what we really need.
Can I add one more thing I just thought of that
Yeah.
really helped me during that time? So I want to talk about hope, like the power of
Mhm.
hope. I think it was all a miracle that Mark survived the plane crash in the first place. That Thomas Honeycutt said to me, I had no reason to be on Deer Valley Road at that moment in time. I'm a cell phone tower technician, and I'm all over Phoenix. And I happened to be on that road with my partner because we were going to our first couples counseling appointment.
Ah.
And so if he'd not been there, I really don't know who would have stepped forward to have rescued Mark. So that already felt like a miracle. And then the fact that Mark survived the first 2 weeks. And then I have a story to tell. About a few months into his burn injury and time at the burn center, he was diagnosed with a near fatal fungal infection. And the doctor said to me, call the whole family in. He might not make it through the weekend. And so the whole family came in, and the next day we had a meeting, and the doctor said, look, there are three potential scenarios for Mark. One, he takes a turn for the better. Two, the infection started in his arms, and if it spreads to the rest of his arms, we're going to have to amputate his arms, which, oh, we had a really hard time with that idea. And then the third is it spreads to his internal organs and he dies immediately. And I thought to myself, wow, I need some time to kind of process that. The next morning, I was in the waiting room early, and I heard a small voice say to me, Mark will be fine. Don't worry. Don't doubt. And I thought, okay, I'm losing my mind. I'm so stressed that I'm starting to hear things. Well, so it was very interesting. The next morning, I worked out at our little apartment, Airbnb, and I'm on a very peaceful walk back to the apartment, and I hear those three sentences again. I hear the voice say, Mark will be fine. Don't worry, don't doubt. And then I'm thinking, okay, now I'm paying attention. Where is that coming from? Is it my intuition? Is it my inner voice? Is it God? And I look back now and I think it doesn't matter. I heard that voice. And the third day in the morning, I heard it again. It was so emphatic, simple, and to the point. Mark will be fine. Don't worry, don't doubt. And the interesting thing was, by the weekend, he was still in sort of a just neutral state. The family all went home, and the doctors were like, we'll wait and see. And you know what? That fungal infection never spread. And 6 weeks later, he came out of it. And the doctor said it was actually a miracle. I mean, we thought he was going to die. But what I learned by what they modeled to me in their communication is they never say never, and they never say always, right? And so my definition, it really affected, influence how I think about hope now. And I use it all the time for myself, even now, which is, to me, the definition of hope is not expectation. Hope is a belief in possibilities. And as long as you can always hold that in your mind and heart, you can get through a lot in life, I believe. So hope is not an expectation, it's a belief in possibilities.
It also really centers you really in the present.
Yes.
So can you tell us, Jenny, a little bit about your experience around the day of losing Mark? What, when you realized he wouldn't survive, and how you made those choices and decisions to respond as you did. How did you and others witness and receive your grief?
Yeah, that was a really tough day. That was a really tough day. They called me at 4 a.m. that his liver wasn't doing well. They never had to call me middle of the night, so I knew it was really bad. I got in to the burn center, and there was just a big commotion. There were a lot of medical staff in his room doing all sorts of stuff. There wasn't much for me to do. I was by myself. And then it's really interesting. I have an unusual story to share. Everybody cleared out at about 10:30, and I knew things were dire. And there's a song called "Sirens" by Pearl Jam that Mark and I really liked, and there's a backstory to that song. Mark always paid attention to words, and I always just paid attention to the melody. And when that song first came out on their album, he said to me, I know you love that song, but do you know the words? They're actually really sad. And when Eddie Vedder sings about sirens, he's really talking about ambulance sirens coming for me, not the Greek sirens like women. And I said, really? And I looked it up, and really the words are, Eddie singing, the ambulance sirens are coming from me, and I'm turning to the woman I love to tell her how much I love her, and that when I look in her eyes, the fear goes away. And I'm going to start crying here. But by grace, every day, I know that death could be around the corner. And those are the words of that song. And what happened at about 10:30, when all the commotion and all the medical staff was out of there, I heard music playing. You know, we loved music. Mark and I love music. We always had playlists going, and one was his rock playlist, and the other one was meditation music. So the nurses knew when Mark's doing well, play his rock playlist, but when he's not doing well, play the meditation playlist. I believe it's healing. And so when everybody cleared out, I noticed that the rock playlist was on. I was really irritated. I walked over and I was going to switch it to the meditation playlist. And you know, the song that was playing was Sirens. It was Sirens at 10:30, and then a half hour the doctor came in to tell me there was no hope for Mark. And then he died at 5 o'clock that afternoon. Now, I held out that something could change, right? I like, could there be another miracle? Is there hope? They called the chaplain in. She came in and she said, listen, I've heard your story from the doctors, and I want you to know that you are absolutely right to always hold out for a miracle or to have hope. And I'm here to pray with you. And that was so comforting. It really was. My sister made it out. We called the whole family in. And at 5 o'clock, Mark died. And that was devastating because um, I was 23 when my father died, and our youngest son, Adrian, was 23. And I remember thinking to himself when Mark had the accident, I hope that he doesn't have to go through what I did at 23. And then it happened. And I think the worst moment when I look back was that time when I had to call our boys, to tell them that their father died. That was truly the hardest moment. So it happened fast. So there was really no time to adjust.
Well, in facing all of that, I mean, not only you yourself having to navigate kind of what came to be, but then to have to share and relay that news and information and everyone's responses and perceptions and functioning around loss. I mean, you lost, and I've been reading your book, and I remember also your experiences and what you shared of me then, as well as what you're sharing of me now. You lost your friend, your partner, your soulmate, and then we're required to face and live life forward, and your children as well. And how did you do that?
Yeah. It was hard. The first year I was in shock. I think, and it was COVID during the start of COVID. So Mark
The
died
timing
October
too.
2019, and February was when everything shut down. And I did join a spouse partner support group, grief support group. That was really, really helpful. I didn't want to see a therapist because I felt like I had a lot of good friends who were willing to listen, but I wanted to be with people who knew what it was like to lose your partner.
Yeah.
And not all my friends had, right? And so that was really wonderful. And I found a lot of people said to me, oh, do you really want to join a group like that? It's just so sad. How can you carry the burdens of others? And I said, you know what? I found it to be helpful. We helped each other, we celebrated each other's loved ones. And when someone would tell a story about their partner, the rest of us would just feel this warm glow, right? And we shared that together. And so that really helped me that first year. But there is something about losing your partner to a traumatic injury like burn that is different than when you lose your partner to cancer or an illness, which was what everybody else in my grief support group went through. So about a few months into this, Kobe Bryant, remember, had his helicopter accident, and that was hugely triggering for me. And I got in touch with an organization called Access. So they're a nonprofit that provides support to people who lost loved ones to an aviation disaster. And so Heidi Snow, who's the director of that group, had lost her fiance in the TWA crash out of Kennedy many years ago. And anyway, so I got in touch with her. She was so kind, and she set me up with a mentor. So a woman in Maine who lost her husband to a small plane crash in Maine, and she was 5 years ahead of me. And she had some very wise words for me, and she was 5 years ahead of me. She said, Jenny, I would always want my husband back, but I look back now with gratitude that it forced me to grow as a person. And she said, I know this sounds hard to believe, but think about the fact that now that you're on your own, you have no one you have to negotiate your life with. You can do whatever you want. And that was a really, really interesting perspective. And then she also had remarried by that point, 5 years in. She had three small children under the age of 12 when her husband died. And so she had a really tough time, working and having the kids, taking care of the kids. Anyway, but you see, that gave me hope. I
Mhm.
said, oh, it was the first time I thought about the possibility that I might meet another soulmate.
Mhm.
Like I thought I was so lucky to have had Mark in my life. Is it even possible? Not ready for it, but that little idea got planted in my mind after I talked to her. And
Mhm.
so if I look back now, because it's been 6 years almost, it'll be 6 years next month that Mark died. I feel like there were four phases I went through, and they're not linear. You're circling,
Mhm.
circling, circling. You go back, you go take one step forward and you go two steps back and you keep going. And it was really four things. One, I was in shock. Nothing replaces the disappearance suddenly of someone you've been with for 30 years, like in my case. And then, second, I went through, who am I? My dear friend, Dr. Connie Mariano in Arizona, she is called the White House Doctor. She lost her husband the same summer Mark died or had his accident, and he died in a glider accident.
Mhm.
And she calls it, you're going from we to me. What
Mhm.
does that mean? Who am I without my partner? Right. And so I spent a lot of time getting to know myself. Like, who am I? And I found that 80% of who I was still intact. But for example, I learned to ski because Mark was an avid skier. I discovered I still love to ski. I was the one who introduced him to his first trip to Italy. I still love Italy.
Mhm.
And he loved everything fast. And I said, I always wanted to learn a kayak. And he never wanted to do that. So I went out and bought inflatable kayaks and I went out kayaking with girlfriends. And, speed was Mark's middle name. He never would have agreed to doing that. And so a dear friend of mine, Susie, said to me about into my second year of grief, she said, Jenny, it's time to create new memories. It's not that you are ever going to figure out these amazing memories you had with Mark, but it's time to create new memories. And that was very wise advice because that's what got me moving forward. And after 2 years, the third is I really went through major personal growth. It was just like the woman from Maine told me. I feel like I was forced to grow as a person, but in good ways. And I went through a real transformation journey, and it really triggered me kind of learning a lot about my family and how family patterns and on both sides of my family had affected me. I think something about getting cracked open by grief and tragedy causes you to kind of self examine a lot more and to have the courage to do that. And I would say that during that time, I said, gee, it's very interesting. There are no guarantees in life. What happened to Mark and I is what we thought would happen to other people, not to us. And it happened, and my life changed in an instant. And so I said, but so bad things happen, but it also means good things happen too. And that change is the only guarantee. And I think that gave me hope again. That made me believe that while something horrible, horrible happened to me and Mark, it doesn't mean good things can't happen again. And I look forward to the day those things happen. And by the second year, I decided it was time to go experiment with dating. I had thought a lot about, gee, is it possible to meet another soulmate? I don't know, but I know I'm wired for partnership. And so, in a weird role reversal, Adrian, my younger one, and he was the one who coached me on getting online to do dating because I hadn't dated since I was 24 years old. I mean, that was a long time ago. I thought, I don't know who I'm interested. I don't know. I mean, I think maybe I'm looking for a clone of Mark. That's what my friends all worried about. Like she's going to go looking for somebody who's the twin of Mark, and that's impossible. Um, but it was great because I said I put no pressure on myself. I'm not looking for the one. This is just to learn who I have become and what I'm looking for. And in the second time around with kids out of the house, I said, it's actually very pure. I'm just looking for loving companionship. I'm not looking for someone to build careers with. I'm not looking for someone to, start a family with, right? Or a financial future. This is really just loving companionship. And I have to tell this story because it was really quite magical how Robert, my partner now, and I met. So uh, I went online and I went on a series of dates during, I think it was about 5 months. That was I was entertainment for all my married friends. And then after 5 months, my dear friend David, who lost his wife to cancer a few years earlier, comes over and he's looking at my online profile and goes, "Oh, change that picture, take that picture out. No, that's not good." And then he says, "Your search parameters are really narrow, Jenny." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, I understand you only want to meet people in a 35-mile radius because the traffic's so bad in the San Francisco Bay Area. But you're indicating you'll only go out, consider snowboarders and skiers." And he says, "Don't you think that's a little narrow?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but I love skiing and it's a proxy for fitness." And he says, "Oh, so you're telling me if the guy bicycles or runs or plays volleyball, you won't consider him?" I said, "Oh, God, you're so logical, David. You're right. I should take that off." Okay. Then a week later, I was on my Facebook widowers group for dating. And it's not to date each other, but to give each other advice. And someone asked, "How far would you be willing to commute for a relationship?" And I thought, "Oh, not at all. 35 minutes, that are 35 miles. That's it." I was about to type my post in. Someone beat me to it and said, "For the right man, I would be willing to commute 2.5 hours." And I thought, 2.5 hours? I said, "Mark used to commute in a flight from Reno to the Bay Area an hour." And suddenly I started thinking about fun vacations we had in San Diego, LA. So I changed my mind on the spot. I typed on my post and I said, "I'd be willing to go on a flight up to an hour and a half to LA, Portland, or San Diego." A week later, Robert got in touch and he was from La Costa, California. I was like, "I don't know where that is. Where is that?" And I Google it and it's Carlsbad down south, north of San Diego. And I'd been to Carlsbad a lot. And what I had told Mark before we decided to retire to Lake Tahoe is that I wanted a beach cottage in Carlsbad because I grew up on the coast. And we decided to go to lakes and mountains, and that was fine. But I said, and he said, "Okay, I'll make a note of that, Jenny. You love Carlsbad. You want a beach cottage there." And then Robert shows up from Carlsbad. It was very interesting. I told no one. I told no one else except Mark that I wanted a beach cottage in Carlsbad. Um, and so that was the beginning of a budding relationship with Robert. But I feel like it was a series of interesting steps that got me there, and openness. And Robert said to me it was actually a mistake that he found me. So he thought I lived in LA or near San Diego. And on our first call, he asked me, "Where's Mountain View, California?" Because I'm in Mountain View. And I'm thinking, "Why don't you know? You're the one who found me." And it turned out that he was in Oakland visiting family when he did the search, and the dating algorithm localized to where he was. And that's how he found me. And then after we met, okay, I just have to tell you a story. It's not even in the book, Lori, because we didn't figure this out till a year and a half ago after I finished writing the book. The book's just a window, a snapshot in time. We found out that we both worked at the same company in 1989 when we were newlyweds. We both worked at the same company in Santa Clara. He was a consultant driving up from LA every 2 weeks. And that was my first job after I moved from New York to California. And I was only there for 10 months. So we think we probably passed each other in the hallway, passed in the lunchroom, but never got introduced. And we weren't looking romantically because he got married that year and I did too. Then fast forward many years later, we found out that we were both staying in the same neighborhood in Phoenix in 2019 when I was there with Mark at the Burn Center, and he apparently was there with his wife who had cancer, and she was receiving alternative cancer treatments, and both our spouses died that year. And then we met 2 years later by accident online on a dating app. And so our friends now say it was like you were circling each other your whole life until you were ready to meet.
Mhm.
And I do look back now and I believe that Mark guided us to each other because Robert's from Carlsbad. I mean, how do you explain that? And so I've come away. I've had many interesting, unexplainable experiences, signs and synchronicities that started at the burn center. And that story I told you about the fungal infection and hearing the little voice, I have really part of my growth. So going back to what I went through in grief is I've really learned to trust my intuition. That is something that I was really out of touch with before Mark's accident. And so that was a big part of my growth journey. And then the final one I just want to say briefly, because Lori, you talked about the nervous system in the beginning. I
Mhm.
belatedly came into realizing that my nervous system was stuck in fight or flight. I think it was in freeze. And I want listeners to know it's a real medical condition
Mhm.
because I had 18 years of migraines and vertigo, and it started to get more frequent after Mark's accident and death. And I didn't understand it because I thought, well, I'm going through all this personal growth. I really became a more reflective person. I meditated every day. I felt like I went through a lot of emotional healing, but I had this sort of lag with my body. And I
Mhm.
was starting to feel continuously dizzy. And I wasn't doing well at higher elevation. In fact, I was getting vertigo. And series of steps, I got referred to a chiropractic neurologist in Phoenix. And he diagnosed me with a nervous system that was stuck. I mean, there were medical symptoms around it. And I went to 2 months of daily treatment at the clinic to reset my nervous system. And then I had to do emotional work. So there's a great book by Nicole Sachs called Mind Your Body. It just came out, and she takes you through a journaling exercise to excavate emotions, negative emotions that you've repressed, and
Mhm.
how it shows up in your body. And I'm really proud to say that after 4 months and 5 months of doing this work, my migraines have subsided and my vertigo has too. But there was a lot of emotional work. And I didn't realize how much my body had gotten disconnected from my emotions and my intellect. So I just hope listeners know that it's something to take seriously if you've had trauma, and trauma from childhood as well as trauma later in life, right? If you've had any in childhood, and parents are parents, even the best parents, life happens. They're not always there for you. And, you develop a pattern maybe or a habitual way that you respond to stress that may not be the best for you. And then when you have a big trauma that happens, like in my case, all of that starts to erupt and come out.
Mhm.
And then I was really forced to deal with it. So I'm really happy to say that the physical part was a big part of my journey as well, right? So the shock, the who am I, the personal growth, and finally the physical healing. That's only come in now in my fifth, 5 to 6 years later.
Mm.
The
I
mind.
know it's a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful. And I think a lot of people will need to hear that
Uh-huh.
about how our mind and body are connected
Connected.
and how much the mind can heal. Ah, so what have been some of your hope anchors, those people, places, practices of living,
Mhm.
and concepts that made the world and you in it feel any semblance of safe again?
I think some of them you're starting to like share with us as well now too, in terms of kind of like meditation,
Yeah.
like nervous system work, emotional regulation.
Getting in touch with yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah. I felt, one thing I learned at the Burn Center is I now believe love is an energy, not just an emotion. And after Mark died, I said, I'm going to start meditating. But I have a monkey mind. I had many false starts before his accident. And so I read this great Oprah article that said, hey, just start with 1 minute every day in January, and every successive month add another minute. So by December, you're meditating 12 minutes a day. And I thought, well, gosh, that's really achievable. This was in February. So I said, well, I'm going to start today and I'm going to start with 2 minutes, right? And it was really quite an incredible experience because the other thing I started to do was I thought, given what I learned about love being an energy, I said, I would like to learn how to incorporate love into my meditation practice. And so
Mm.
years ago, when I worked at a big company, we had brought in a organization called Heart Math Institute, and they came in and taught stress management workshops, right, and biofeedback, and they were really early and exciting and innovative. And I thought, well, I wonder what they're up to. So I looked them up, and they had a 6-week heart-based or heart coherent meditation practice. And I see Lori nodding her head, so she must
I've
be
done that
familiar.
before. I'm heart math
Yeah,
trained and I actually love utilizing it with my clients.
it's
I'm like,
amazing,
uh-huh.
amazing. Yeah. And so it's a love base. It's really a love
Yeah.
based. And I just wanted to say there's research. So there's science behind love being an energy. Not
Mhm.
so what their research shows at Heart Math Institute is when you can come from a place of love and appreciation in your meditation practice, you go to alpha state or Schumann resonance. And it is that incredible deep sense of well-being, right, that you achieve when you go through when you meditate. But what they said is couples who do this for each other at a distance or in person, their heart rhythms start to synchronize when you do this practice. And
Mm.
also with your animals, with your pets, dogs, cats, horses, and that you actually radiate that energy to other people and animals in their nervous systems. And it's low level electromagnetic signals that you are sending out into the world. And I thought, wow, so that's the kind of meditation I was doing every day. And it was really life changing. It really got me through, and I still practice it. Now I do more guided breath work with it, like really, really focus on the breath work,
Mhm.
especially to work on the physical symptoms that I had around my nervous system to calm it down. But I think the love part of it, the heart coherent part, and the breath work really, really changes and calms your nervous system down. And I find that when you're in that state of love and hope and peace, that you're able to imagine the future you want in a way that can actually happen in your life. And you begin to attract people. Like, I feel like I'm at a state now where it's no mistake who shows up in my life. And I really trust the universe that good things will happen and the right people will show up at the right time. And I let go of control. Lori knows this. I was a super type A person before Mark died. I wasn't a super controlling person, but I was the head of HR for tech companies. So
Uh-huh.
we were all trained to be calm when everything's falling apart around us, right? And I really learned to just learn to really be at peace, but in a truly authentic way, right?
Mm.
And that got me through a lot. And that I believe that love can show up in your life now. And there's gonna be a change of people that are attracted into your life. Some people may opt out, some people are gonna come in. I love what Martha Beck, the life coach, says. She's written a lot of books. She says it's like the elevator of your life may empty out of some people, but it's all right because it's creating room for new people to show up in your elevator. And I have found that to be true.
Well, I think I really feel like a lot of like your finding of yourself and development of such spaciousness of heart and love and propulsion in your life. I mean, you detail really well in this book that you've been writing. I'm not all the way through it yet. I'm over halfway, so no spoilers here. But you wrote a book to really document your experience, Mark's experience, your growth in moving through, grievous loss and facing life again. Your book entitled Forever Fly Free. Would you be willing to share with us a little bit about kind of how did the book come about and how has it been a part of the healing for you as well as what you hope to offer and empower in others?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lori. I think, as I mentioned before, I start writing those daily posts and pouring my
Huh?
heart out to everybody. And then I was also journaling on my own, right,
Mhm.
at home. And I found that it was very cathartic to
Mhm.
write the book because it was helpful to really, I had to relive what I went through in a way. I did decide to go to a therapist. You remember I said I didn't feel like needed one in the beginning, but I thought, I probably need a little support while I write the book.
Uh-huh.
But I learned a lot writing it. Like I noticed and had more insights that I hadn't seen along the way, because now you have the wisdom of looking back, right? And
Mhm.
seeing what you went through. And that's when I realized the power of hope was so powerful. I hadn't realized that that's what carried me through during that time. And so writing was helpful. And the reason why I ended up writing the book was at Mark's memorial service. I had a lot of people say to me, "Your posts online were so inspiring, Jenny. You've got to write a book because of what you went through. Not everybody will go through something quite as terrible, but you give people courage and inspiration when they know that you've been able to get through it and to thrive again, or at least have the attitude that you can right
Mhm.
at that stage." And so it took a couple years before I was ready to do it. I felt no pressure. I just sort of said, it's out there at some point. I did want to be a novelist. That was going to be my second act after I left my corporate job
Mhm.
to move to Lake Tahoe, and already had a novel I wrote 10 years ago on the back burner. And so I had been working on that. And then about 2 years after Mark died, I felt called to write the memoir. Like it was time. I just knew. See, so that goes back to trusting
Mhm.
your intuition. I felt the call. And so I wrote it, and it took like a year. It just flowed out of me. I
Mhm.
hardly even thought about it. It just flowed out of me. And things happened from there. And I found a agent and a publisher fairly quickly. And um, and then here we are. So that's what happened with the book.
Well, and that book releases when and how, like if someone wanted to check it out and to listen to it or read it to it, what would be the best way for them to access that book?
It's available October 14th. You can pre-order now on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, or Target. So, and if you order now, it'll arrive on October 14th. If you're in an international country that's outside of Canada or the US, you won't be able to pre-order on those retail websites, but you can if you go to my author website, www.foreverflyfree.com.
Mm.
And then after that, everybody can order off all the retail sites. So that's where they can find the book.
I love that. Super accessible too.
That's so amazing.
Yeah.
So, our last question for you.
Okay.
Um, you lived through one of the most tragic and difficult life experiences, that of tremendous injury and loss, and you're finding a new plane of life and living and engagement again. How and what might you share with others listening to this podcast who might be in a similar place of loss and grief and facing the realities of life different than they once were?
Yeah. I mean, I think I mentioned a few of them. I think one is um, the only guarantee in life is change. And so if you're struggling through a difficult time, just know and have faith to know that good things will happen again, right? And I never realized until I went through loss that love, beauty, and sadness can all be emotions you feel at the same time.
Mhm.
They aren't either or, they're and that there's a lot of joy to be found in the small moments in life. I've come to really appreciate that. And I think that's helpful. Think of things that really give you joy. And I'm talking about small things, right? It could be your garden, it could be your drive, the more scenic drive to work every day. It doesn't have to be something big like on vacation, but all the small moments, a hug from your grandchild or your daughter. The other thing is that really served me well was focusing fully on the now. I think I mentioned at the Burn Center, I learned every day is sufficient for that day. Don't. So Eckhart Tolle has a great quote. He said this in a video to a bunch of students. He said, "Focus fully in living in the present moment. Don't dwell on the past, and don't overthink the future." And I don't think I would have understood that before Mark's accident. I understood it in theory, but I now understand it experientially. And so Lori got me connected with some of the amazing and inspiring burn survivors when Mark was still alive. And they all said something similar in their own way, right? I'm thinking of Boyd Smith. He said, I don't ever think about the future. I'm focused on now and how I'm going to get through now. He was a burn survivor. Mark Haley, who was a drag car race car driver who survived 60% burns on his body. When he left rehab after the burn center, he had him play that song by Boston called "Don't Look Back," right? So I have my own version of that, which is I really do focus on the present moment because this is what true reality is. You don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? So that would be a second thing. And then I encourage people to just allow yourself to feel grief and sadness and loss and all the emotions without judgment. And, one of the things I wrote an article recently about this. During my grief journey, I read this documentary, or I saw a documentary of a Polynesian island where a young man had died young, and hundreds and hundreds of people showed up for his service. And the ceremony was where they were all yelling, screaming, crying, physical grief. And to all of us in American society and Western society, we're not used to that. We don't know how to talk about loss and grief. It makes us all uncomfortable. I was in the same boat before Mark had his accident. I felt awkward talking to friends who lost somebody. And this really showed me this video of all these young men, and especially men, right? Just letting it all out. I felt so empowered to just say, you know what? I'm going to cry. I'm going to scream. I'm going to yell. I'm going to be mad at God and ask God to give Mark back. I want him back. Why did you take him? And then it would dissipate. The anger would just be gone after a while. And I think once you go through that emotion and you feel like you can come out the other side okay, you start to realize, if you don't allow yourself to feel without judgment, you're only prolonging your grief even more. It will just take longer. And although we'll always remember our loved ones who we lose, like we'll never stop missing them, that pain edge to what you feel lessens and feels softer over time. And then it's always remembering the good memories and the good times. And so I think that's the other one. And to ask for help.
Mhm.
So last thing, I was a firstborn kid. Mark was a firstborn kid. We didn't know how to ask for help. And we were the ones who took care of our younger siblings, right? Like we had to be there for them. And I had to learn to ask for help. And so that's the other thing. People are actually offended when you don't ask for help, especially when you are obviously going through such a tough time, because they want to help. And they feel like, if you're my friend, why wouldn't you ask me for help? And so that's back to what Lori was emphasizing, being vulnerable.
Mhm.
Being vulnerable and letting people in so they can love you and give you the support you need. That's really important. So those would be some things that come to mind.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you so much for your presence, your experience, how you've witnessed and held and walked through your own grief, and you're now sharing and making further meaning and honor of the journey in your book release and your work with others. We are so grateful to have met you, talked with you today, and we really look forward to any opportunities to collaborate further, if and as possible, as we continue to grow and build life and healing supports around the burn and trauma healing journey. We thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. I mean, it's been wonderful to be on the interview with both of you. And I know Lori, of course, going back to that chapter of my life and how amazing Lori was. She really did so much to support our family. So thank you, Lori, too.
You are so welcome. And I think for me, like on that, again, like I find there's so much value similar to you in how we share appreciation and love. It's such a treasure to see you now and to have that in parallel to how I saw you then, and to see how you've grown and built and found that inner resilience and hope that also allows you to, I mean, your book very accurately, the title describes you, how you're also learning to forever fly free amidst your own energy and amidst your own self. So I found that like it was a very, very parallel piece in space.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that that was a real metaphor for me, and I'm glad you brought that up, Lori. It's like when everything happened to Mark, it was like I was a baby bird pushed out of its nest in free fall. And that grief journey and the growth journey was all about learning how to fly again, right? How to fly. And I did. I learned how to fly. And I think all of us can.
Yep.
All of
I would
us
agree
can.
with that. I would agree with that. And typically, what we do at the end of each of our episodes, we always like to share a tool, a takeaway, something that people can take with them. And I let people know within our first episode and this season, we're going to be focusing on a lot of somatic tools, which may be more movement based or breath based or body based. So we're going to have an opportunity to step into and share a little bit of a somatic element of healing to close out today's episode. And we're going to take a dip into, yes, our nervous systems yet again, because our nervous systems really allow us and build into the perception of what and how we step into life. And so this somatic takeaway today is going to be around breath. And yes, using the harness of breath to how we really can support our greater sense of mindfulness, our emotional movement, return to more of a sense of presence and safety within ourselves, because this is ultimately where that safety starts. And so if you're currently grieving, this could be a really great practice for you, a simple and powerful breathing technique that you can use to help you begin feeling, healing, releasing. And as I encourage for every type of practice, every takeaway, finding yourself in a comfortable position to listen for later participation or to listen and engage in now. So maybe that's for you seated, maybe that's for you laying down. And I invite you to, if it feels possible for you, one hand on that lower abdomen and one hand on your heart space. And we're going to take 3 deep diaphragmatic breaths. So allowing your abdomen to gently inflate as you inhale. Abdomen inflate, maybe filling it in your rib space up to your throat. And then gently fall as you exhale. Your rib space comes in, your abdomen comes in. And then 2 more. Inflating that abdomen, expanding the ribs up to your throat, and exhale. And once more, inflate, inhale, expand, stomach, ribs, throat, and then exhale and release. Those ribs come back in, and that abdomen gently falls. And this time, as we inhale, and we're going to do an inhale and exhale of 5, we're going to inhale through our nose, and then we're going to exhale and make a sound out of our mouth. And that sound is kind of like you're letting the air out of a tire. So we're going to do this for 5 cycles. So inhaling through your nose, and then exhale. And continue at your own pacing 5 times, just noticing anything you notice, being curious about what's going on in your body space, in your head space. Maybe you experiment a bit with the length of your exhale. And after that final breath in and out, I invite you to take a moment to just check in with what you're noticing now. How are you experiencing yourself in your body? What was that combination of breath and sound and movement like for you? And this breathwork technique brings us to a little bit of Chinese medicine. So in traditional Chinese medicine, there's the knowledge that your grief is housed in your lungs. And we can strengthen that lung qi. So qi is energy, that lung qi through consciousness, through intentional breath work and breathing practices. And the sound is actually one of these 6 healing sounds in Taoist practices. And it's found in many styles of Qigong, which is a Chinese or form of movement and energy. And it's a sound vibration that pairs really nicely with those lung and large intestines, which again, grief and sorrow can really sit in. So if you've ever really struggled with breathing or with even your digestive system and your movement, that's very akin to grief and sadness and how we hold them. So just a really unique, simple practice that might explore, inspire some opening, some movement with how you hold grief in your system.
That's nice. I do find myself, if I'm ever in an agitated state of any sort, just to remind yourself to breathe. And then there are these so many little avenues.
Well, it's just, again, like I think when we find unique ways to do simple things, sometimes that encourages us to engage in them more fully than we might otherwise.
Yes, and to be mindful and recognize, what am I feeling when I do this? Oh, wow, you guys, this was an amazing episode. Holy cow. So we'll talk a little more about it in our next episode. So let's close out now. Changed by Fire is a 501c3 nonprofit committed to helping burn survivors, their families, burn care professionals cope and thrive through the burn injury and healing process, emotionally, psychologically, and socially, utilizing alternative healing methods such as EFT, equine therapy, burn scar massage, yoga, music therapy, meditation and breath work, and more. And we are excited to provide regular community events in Arizona to enhance relationships and community, as well as we're actively building out our website to showcase even more virtual supports and offerings as well. So check out our new online portal, which offers a variety of recorded offerings of alternative healing modalities for access to holistic help supports no matter where you live. Check us out at www.changedbyfire.org. And if you are in Arizona, a little update on our next event, A Day at the Ranch with Changed by Fire, happening Saturday, November 8th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So this amazing event allows for participation in a variety of alternative healing modalities, fun games, and interactions with other survivors, family, and staff in healing and nourishing food. There's always good food to complement the nourishing soul energy. So it's free for attendees. Check our Changed by Fire website to register and sign up. And if you are interested in being on the podcast, sharing your tools for healing, if you want to attend an event like this, or if you're a practitioner and would like to further help us expand our reach, please reach out to us.
I think I definitely feel you on just how much this particular episode brought up, and yet also allowed, and the energy still may be sifting around.
Yep.
So again, just be mindful and intentional with how you listen to our episodes. If you need to pause or sporadically kind of slowly lengthen how you listen to them and process through them, be gentle with you. And that's going to lead us into that HEAL acronym. Heed your nervous system's cues. That's our H for today. It's providing you around your grief and loss experiences. Listen to it. E, embody your needs. Use your breath. Use how you're moving, your practices to support any sense of softening, any sense of movement towards safety, which might involve going from fast to slow. Hitting the pause button a little bit of time.
Breathing.
Being gentle with yourself. Yep. A, allow for support, patience, self-care, kind of what Jenny was referencing around time, your functionality, shifting what is possible for you now in this moment, which might be different than it was before. And L, let yourself practice and embody that gentleness as you move forward and find or refine the sense of greater wholeness amidst hard things. Loss and love and life can coexist together. Find your seating amongst them. We look forward to seeing you soon.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.